constitutional freedoms that have been lost since 9/11. Thank you.
Everybody, Mitchell Seiter, actually, they're close enough. I go to Indiana University Southeast, and I'm a mathematics and computer science major, which has absolutely nothing to do with this presentation. First off, I'd like to start off with a quote from Thomas Jefferson, written to James Madison in a letter. Above all things, I hope the education of the common people will be attended to, convinced that on their good sense we may rely with the most security for the preservation of a due degree of liberty. This is really important to my whole topic, because Thomas Jefferson really wanted to implement that the common people would be educated through various sources, as media, just their own people and everything, to know that they would have a good sense of what's going on in the news and to secure their own liberties, which I believe have been violated pretty horrendously in the past decade since 9/11 or so. So start off with the First Amendment here, which a lot of people are familiar with, but I'll go and read that later. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, the press, the right of the peacefully to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And I'm just going to start off here with this part right here, the chilling effect. It's an indirect violation of the First Amendment. When what the chilling effect is it's a term coined in the 1960s. And how it works is it stops people from necessarily engaging in their liberties for fear of consequences. So, for example, such as the Edward Snowden case, a lot of people will see him as either a whistleblower or a so-called traitor. And he was supposedly implementing freedom of press, giving information out, but he was marked as a traitor by the government. He was marked as a traitor as the government, and what happened is a lot of other so-called whistleblowers that might come out might be scared to come out with information they might have, so as to because of possible repercussions. And that's sort of what the chilling effect is it just sort of scares people from actually engaging in their rights. First one of the direct constitutional violations I want to get into are free speech zones. And what free speech zones are, there's areas set up where people, they can, during rallies and whatnot, where they can actively say what they want to say. And these free speech zones have been around since the early 20th century, but they've really expanded since 9/11. And one example I want to give is in 2003, there was a Bush rally, and a gentleman in Pittsburgh, his free speech zone was about a quarter to 3/4 of a mile away in a baseball field, and that was only for the dissenters of Bush. So only people who didn't agree with Bush were all put in this area, and anybody who did agree with Bush, they were allowed to get as close as they want. So it really only left one side of the opinion, and so people were no longer allowed. So people who criticized the government, they were kind of shoved under the rug. So it really left people's free speech kind of out. And the next part I want to talk about is the right to assembly. And there's two events there: the G20 summit in 2011, I believe, in Pittsburgh, and some of the Occupy protests. The G20 summit in Pittsburgh, what it is a bunch of people were protesting outside the G20 summit because a lot of them were anti-capitalist and they really feel like the system had failed them, sort of similar to the Occupy protests, and they were out there. And all of a sudden the riot police come, and they're all being forced to scatter. And and a lot of people who weren't even necessarily assembling were caught in the riot blast as well. And there was a lot of really bad police brutality, such as these militarized sonic cannons, which are supposed to blast out eardrums, and they sort of just stop people where they're at, and it can break eardrums. And another thing I want to talk about is the Occupy protests. One thing a lot of people are familiar with is the picture out in California where the college students at one of the University of California campuses, the cop going around pepper spraying everybody. A lot of people have seen that picture. Everyone has. But that was sort of another example of the police brutality where all the people were assembled peacefully. Like they weren't really causing any trouble, but the police, they just kind of went up and they just pepper sprayed everybody, causing a lot of damage to people. And that sort of relates back to the chilling effect as well, where people who might want to protest, like we would like to protest assembly because we don't agree with this necessary thing, but we don't want to get pepper sprayed and lose our vision forever. And last thing I want to talk about here for this amendment is the trespass bill, which just recently passed in 2011. And what the trespass bill is it makes it illegal to assemble anywhere where a Secret Service agent is protecting any government official. And it may not necessarily be like any type of event or anything. It could just be, and it could be two unrelated events. So say someone's protesting something in the local community, but say a government official is rolling through town, they could technically be arrested because the government official would be protected by a Secret Service agent, and they would have no recollection of it or no idea that it was happening at all. So it's just another infringement on the right to assemble. The next amendment I want to get into is the Fourth Amendment here. The right for the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. And this is probably one of the most debatable amendments because there's a lot of controversy around it, and it's probably one of the first ones violated since 9/11, especially with the Patriot Act here. The Patriot Act was passed almost immediately after the events of 9/11, and what it did is it expanded the government's authority, and it helped set up the TSA and Homeland Security, and it allowed sort of for the type of unwarrantless wiretaps and getting into phone calls and other video recording devices. And this sort of lead up to the NSA events, which a lot of those are probably a little familiar with, and especially relate to Edward Snowden, who leaked a lot of what the NSA was doing with the spying. And the NSA is not even necessarily using it, the equipment they have for the purposes it was intended. There's been several cases reported where the NSA uses their equipment for personal uses, such as spying on people they particularly know, tapping families, friends, and listening on their phone calls, and various spouses, and just getting inside information on people they know. So it's definitely an abuse of power that many people would see as a violation of their Fourth Amendment rights. And the last event I want to talk about for the Fourth Amendment is the Boston bombing, which occurred almost a year ago now, and I'm sure most of us probably remember the Boston bombing and where they were at and everything. And what it was the Boston Marathon, and 2 bombs went off, and the police, they rallied around, and after the initial blast, the police did a really good job of helping people out and making sure everybody was safe. But it was afterwards, when they were hunting down the two brothers who set off the bombs, when they were searching for them. They were going through various neighborhoods, and they were just they would kick in anybody's houses, just looking for these 2 people with no necessarily probable cause that anybody was in those houses. And they would go in, search through without any type of seizure or without any type of warrant, and they'd just be looking for these guys. And it sort of came out in the end that the 2 people were apprehended primarily through private citizens and corporations with their own security that they had around the city, and through just various eyewitnesses seeing people. The next part I want to talk about are the 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments, which, along with the 7th Amendment as well, which I'm not going to get into because it deals with civil cases, so it's a little outside of this, but they're known as the court system amendments, so they're the amendments that set up sort of the judiciary system as well. And there's just, for certain aspects I want to talk about for each amendment. For the 5th Amendment, I want to talk about you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the process of law. For the 6th Amendment here, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. And for the 8th Amendment here, no cruel and unusual punishments shall be inflicted. For the first part of Amendment 8, there's with drone strikes, and there's one particular case study I want to talk about with Seiter, she's from Yemen, and she migrated to America back in the 1930s for school, and she ended up staying here, and she had a son, and then her grandson lived with her for a long time. Her son moved back to Yemen, but she still lived with her grandson. But her son was on the watch list from the CIA and FBI, but her grandson moved back to Yemen to look for his dad, and just shortly after the dad was executed by various drone strikes who was a U.S. citizen, by the way, with no type of trial or anything. It was just instant, here comes a drone strike, shot him dead, no questions asked. And then the grandson, who wasn't on any type of list, was also shot down in a small town in Yemen as well. So it's definitely a violation of next, because a lot of people consider murder or death a form of cruel and unusual punishment, and there was no type of trial, and they didn't get to face their accusers or anything else. So it'd be definitely an amendment from the court system rights. And the last part I want to talk about is the Chelsea Manning trial here, or Bradley Manning, as she was known during the trial. And what Bradley Manning did at the time is he released files that sort of gave out what the government, or what part of the military was doing over in the Middle East, and it showed some of the operations that were doing, like they kind of beat certain civilians, and some of the helicopters that came in, they blew up kind of whole city streets, all on their own. But shortly after Bradley Manning released these videotapes to the media, he was first locked in a cage for 2 months in Kuwait. Then he was put in Gitmo, where he was deprived of any type of counsel. He was stripped of his clothes. He was forced to stay awake for a very large period of time. And that went on for about 3 years before he finally got a trial, because it didn't really become public at all until about the 3 years when I guess they finally said, we should have a trial for this guy. And so it definitely shows how the right to a speedy trial was violated, because he didn't get that. He was locked away for a long time, and he didn't really get the process of, he didn't really get any type of due process until it became a little bit more public. Just a few closing thoughts that I have. Every year it seems like a little bit more is diminished each and every time, and I think it's important that everyone sort of becomes aware of what is happening, so we can all see and decide if this is really like we're electing the right people that we want to, and see what kind of a nation that we're starting to live in.
You mentioned that these rights have decreased since 9/11. Do you think there's a correlation between the events of 9/11 and the decrease of these rights, or have they just simply happened to decrease since that period of time?
Some of the events do have a correlation with 9/11. I picked 9/11 just because it was a bit of a starting point, but especially with like the Patriot Act and the NSA, that started as sort of a direct correlation because of 9/11. So some of them yes, and some of them no, not necessarily. But I mean, there would be an argument for there could be a strong correlation, because after the government's like, hey, we need to put down kind of dissension all around. So it's just one thing after another, because a lot of things are done in the name of terrorism and to protect people. And it's not necessarily proven that it's always prudent to take away rights to protect people more, although a lot of times it's seen as it is.
Could you argue that the American people have kind of accepted giving up some of these rights in the effort of trying to protect and prevent other events such as 9/11 or the Boston bombing?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not necessarily the intention of this to say that it's wrong, but I think a lot of people are unaware of what is going on, and they don't realize that slowly these rights are being eroded. And like the Bradley Manning trial there, I don't think a lot of people knew the stuff that he went through at the time, like he was locked away and tortured and everything else.